Welcome everybody to Drive to Win. I am here at the SiriusXM studios in the Wynn Las Vegas, and the show is presented by Mobil 1 for the love of driving. And of course, right now you can watch Drive to Win on SiriusXM's ESPN Extra Channel 81, and of course available also on demand now on the SiriusXM app. Well, what a race weekend that was. If there was ever an opening race to a season that set the bar, set the tone, wrote the storylines for a year, I think that was it. I don't know about you, but I was glued. I could not move. I watched every single session. It was fascinating in so many ways. Now, my guest today is James Hinchcliffe. He's been on the show before. You know him from INDYCAR and the F1TV app, and he'll be joining us. I can't wait to dive into everything from the weekend. He wasn't at the race either, so he was an armchair enthusiast like the rest of us. I thought that this reminded me of watching a movie that I hadn't seen before, because or a remake of an old classic, because I knew what I was looking for in terms of storylines and what my predictions were, but when it actually happened, it shows there's still a twist to every tale. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Now, Lando Norris won. We saw that. He won his 6th ever Grand Prix. He's leading the Drivers' Championship. It's the first time we have said that in, 1,029 days. So the first morning, Max Verstappen would have woken up having not been leading the Drivers' Championship. Let's think about that. It's quite a statistic. And it was a barnstormer of a race. The conditions were so awful when it came to the actual race that it was mind-numbing. And I can tell you, as a driver, the uncertainty, the ability to push a car in those wet conditions, following a car, you can't see anything. I love it when we go to the in-cars and we can see from behind the wheel just how appalling it is. But I thought it was a fantastic way to start. Now, for the rookies, not so good. I mean, Antonelli had a great race. We'll touch on that a bit later. But when you have for the rookies out by the end of the race, and including a couple of one world champion and one former Ferrari driver hitting the wall in the terrible conditions, you know how tough it was. But I really thought that the storylines of the weekend were Lando Norris and McLaren being quite as dominant as they were. Now, not an easy win, but for me, Lando Norris came of age, and that is both a statement and a question for me. He's one of those guys, I've touched on it before. He's a cocky kid, right? He's got a strut. I don't know if when he was at school he would have been a friend of mine, or I'd want to punch him in the face, because he's arrogant. He's got that swagger, as small guys often do. Anyway, but with his talent, it's kind of prodigious. And we know he's had some weaknesses. We picked up on it last year, mainly in that mental application, because when he comes under pressure from his great friend, Max Verstappen, he hasn't found it that easy. But this weekend, he just nailed it. And, the question last year in his head was, am I, tough enough to beat Max? I know that inner voice, it was actually a problem for me during my career. It niggles at you, and it shows you almost manifest it, and it comes through. But not for him in this race. He was calm. There was like a quieter arrogance. And he's obviously worked on his mental approach over the winter, and he came out tougher. The statement for me is pole position. You lead the race under pressure. Pressure from a teammate who is absolutely wanting to take your mantle of the lead driver in the team. And that title of lead driver is not written down. It's just unspoken. But Oscar Piastri does not want to keep it like that. And he might be junior in terms of his Formula One experience, but I think he is going to be absolutely outlandish as he gets going. As long as it's not Lando-ish, but it's heading that way. And of course, he had to deal with his arch nemesis, Max Verstappen. So for me, crazy conditions. He put one foot wrong. It was a high speed. You saw Oscar go off right behind him. But with Max applying pressure as he did, and yet Lando still takes the win. So that, for me, is a statement. That's a statement of how much better he is going to be this year. And on the radio, calm and in charge. And, with Oscar Piastri as his teammate, one of the fastest men on the grid, equally as hungry, I think the psychological effects of him being the leader through the weekend. It was so important, on even down to a very almost intrinsic way, because he needed to come out of this first weekend in the lead of the championship and having beat his teammate. His teammate will beat him regularly this year, but I think while Oscar is immune to some of the more sensitive emotions, that's what I take away from it anyway, I think he's a bit more icy in his veins. Lando isn't. So Lando, if he can get on top of the wave, I think he, on his little papaya surfboard, will be tough to knock off during the season. So anyway, I thought that was absolutely fantastic. In the Red Bull camp, this is my second big storyline, was obviously Max finishing second. I don't think he expected the car to be up there on the second row. Liam Lawson, in counterbalance to that, had a DNF. You saw him hit the wall. Again, not hard to do, but if you don't do it, you get a better result. And my question, I guess, and I'm looking forward to asking James about it, is how much of the Red Bull's performance is Max? We know in the past it was just the triple threat. You had the car, you had the team, and you had Max. So no wonder they won everything, races on a row. But now they don't quite have that car. They don't have Adrian Newey. So that knock-on effect we don't fully appreciate yet. But is Max pushing it right to the level? I think so. I think he was driving out of his skin. Is that sustainable? I don't know. I think his ability at the front of the grid, the ability to capitalize on a situation, is second to none. And when he was behind Lando, he was exerting pressure. His only way was to get in Lando's head, force him into an error, and take the win. That's how fine a line it was, and he didn't do it. So what are the mental effects in turn on Max Verstappen by not having made his friend and rival Lando Norris crumble under the pressure? I think it's setting the scene. And he has this uncanny ability to have performance where none exists, especially in bad conditions. So, for me, really, really impressive. And the story is going to get less tight, I think, for Max when Mercedes and Ferrari come on song in terms of qualifying pace. So we might see him shuffle down the board a bit, but never, ever count him out. The one thing that we can't control, of course, is the pace of the other teams. And so for me, let's talk Ferrari. Ferrari, it wasn't the weekend they were looking for. Leclerc was 8th, Lewis was 10th. But there's so much magic around Lewis's move to Ferrari. I think it's very easy to take our eye off the ball there and not see the real situation. Okay, I'm talking for myself. I find it quite hard to differentiate maybe optimism and desire from reality. But the minute the cars hit the track, it was less of the theatrics. It was all about speed and performance. And they looked great in testing, didn't they? But this weekend, it really didn't come together. Consistency, making the right calls. They kept the drivers out, kept Lewis out in the wet one more lap than they should have done. I understand the gamble. He led a Grand Prix for one lap in his opening race for Ferrari. Bit of a moot point, really, the way they shuffled through and the pit stops. But you can see why they wanted to do it. They had to throw a Hail Mary. And not being able to unpack the potential in Melbourne, I don't think that we should be too concerned, because I know, especially Charles Leclerc is going into China, I think he's going to have amazing pace. It does make you think, though, of how complex the proprietary technology is between the teams. And I know a lot has been made about Lewis's steering wheel having different configuration to Charles's, just so he can be more familiar. I'm still blown away that watching the in-car in the pouring rain, they're still making so many different adjustments to bias and torque and diff and gearbox and traction. I mean, it's wild to me. But now imagine doing that at speed with a layout that you don't really know so well. So in a way, Lewis was able to get some laps in, get to the end of the race, bank a ton of information, especially on how he should work with his team. And comparison to his teammate, not really off the pace, race pace the same, and not the outright speed yet. But I think Lewis will know going into the next few races, he absolutely has the ability to do it. 12-year relationship with his former engineer. So let's not take that for granted. So they may have wished for more. but I think they will get it soon. I mean, there is so much to talk about with these rookies, the way they performed. I think that for me, seeing the devastation for them not finishing, I mean, I really did feel sorry for Doonan. I mean, his dad, Mick Doohan, one of the best motorcycle GP racers ever. And, the journey it takes to get to Formula One, to be there in the pit lane, watching your son in the Australian Grand Prix, it was magical until he hit the wall, and he must have just been absolutely distraught, especially with the pressure he's under already in the RB, because he came into this race with people saying, like I mentioned last week, that he might not have the drive for long. Let's see. I thought he did pretty well during practices until he got into the race. Well, there's so much more to talk about, so I think it's time to bring on our guest, James Hinchcliffe. He is winner of 6 IndyCar races. He not only is racing in the IMSA championship, he just did Sebring, I think, the 12 hours. He's a commentator in IndyCar and at Formula One. I don't know how many races he's doing this year, but he also finished second in Dancing with the Stars in 2016. So he's a talented chap. Quick on his feet, let's put it like that. Well, James, welcome to the show, mate. It's nice to have you back.
Yeah, nice to be back. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I imagine you're feeling slightly more energetic than you would have done if you'd just flown home from Melbourne. But what was it like watching it from the sofa instead of being there? Do you wish you'd been there? Because it was wild.
Yeah, I mean, look, I never like getting rained on in a paddock, but at the same time, it kind of made the race all that more exciting. I was busy driving around the 12 hours of Sebring, or else I would have been there. But no, it was just great to get the season kicked off, and what a way to do it too. I mean, that race is always known when it was the first race of the season to kind of throw up interesting results sometimes, but that was usually because of mechanical issues and, reliability, or teams not getting to grips with their cars or limited testing. This was for totally different reasons, a rare, weather event, but it made for a heck of a race.
Amazing. Well, let's just quickly rewind, because, you did the 12 hours of Sebring. How did it get on? I'm sorry, I only literally caught the last part. How did you get on?
No worries. We hit some early troubles, as happens in these races, with some sensors that we had to get replaced. So lost a few laps early, and we're sort of playing catch up the rest of the day. So bit of an non-event for us, but we made it to the end, which is always goal number one in those things. Yeah.
So you managed to catch the race when you got home. That's just what you need, right? You could watch it, right? Sunday. The Sebring was over on Saturday.
Exactly.
So nice, relaxing way to spend the morning. It was wild. Was it? Let's break it down from, all the build up. And I know you have to watch every bit of it now, and I'm sure you get all the press releases and everything as part of what you're doing with F1 TV. But the build up, I thought, was magical this year. There's so many story arcs, but really, until we saw them turn laps in anger in good conditions in Melbourne, we really had no true indication of who was playing what, right?
No, look, I mean, testing is always what testing is. It never gives you the full story. I think everybody was universally in agreement that McLaren was still going to be the car to beat and the team to beat, which proved to be true. But beyond that, it was really tough to put a good, finger on who was going to be where and what the competitive order was. So, and you got to think, I mean, with all the preparation, all the effort, all the energy that goes into getting one of these teams to a new season with a new car, to only have 3 days of testing with the thing, it seems criminal, really. But it makes it more exciting for us because we get to that first race, and the order's sort of an unknown still.
Yeah, when you think about the testing that they used to do, I mean, days and days and days of it, and these were also the top drivers in the world getting tens and tens of days of preseason testing. I certainly think, well, maybe in a way the rookies were more prepared than a guy like Lewis changing teams, because I know they got the chance to drive the older cars, some of them, and get in bank a lot of miles. But coming into this weekend, I think there was a lot of underpreparedness that showed its head during the race, and we'll get into that. But talk about, you and I both experienced it. You're sitting there, you've got a run plan, you're working through the weekend, and Sunday's going to be wet. It is more than the proverbial rain cloud over your head, isn't it? It just, I mean, I don't know about you. I walked around feeling very brave outwardly, going, yeah, no, I love the rain. But inside, I'm just bricking it because I don't really want the rain in my opening Grand Prix of the year. Did you feel for them?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like you say, the preparation is so little anyway. None of them got to turn laps in this new car in the wet. And, I think maybe a few of them did some filming miles on the wrong tire sort of thing in damp conditions or whatever. But obviously that's not the same. And your running is so limited in the car as it is. And then everything you do up to the start of the Grand Prix in the weekend itself is pointless. It's useless from a driver standpoint about learning the car and learning the track conditions, learning, obviously we know how sensitive the Pirellis are, and tire preparation and tire management is such a big part of this sport right now. All of that just goes out the window. So you kind of have to look at it really, approaching it one day at a time. All right, how do we get through our run plans on Friday through free practice? All right, how do we get this thing where we need it to be for qualifying? And then you throw all that out because come Sunday, it's going to be a completely different challenge. So I did feel for the drivers. It was a suboptimal scenario, as you like to say.
Exactly. Well, what were your preconceptions going in? What was your prediction, if you like, we all had it sitting there going, I thought the Ferrari would be more of a player, in this first race. What were yours, and what were your big surprises? I mean, there's so much to cover, but if you had to narrow it down to like the biggest shock for you of the race, what would that have been?
Of the race itself, or the weekend as a whole?
The weekend as a whole.
Let's
start with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. All right, so I'm with you on the Ferrari thing. I think everybody expected their pace to be a little bit higher. And then you saw some of the surprises, like RB being as competitive as they were. After testing, I thought that Haas would maybe be a little bit further up the grid, and with Behrman's performances in his races last year, I think there was maybe a bit more expectation on him within the rookie class. And obviously that didn't really translate until the race day itself. So there were a bunch of different things. Max was downplaying the Red Bull, as he likes to do. But it showed decent pace, certainly through qualifying. But I think the one thing that wasn't surprising was seeing McLaren consistently up front.
Yeah. I mean, the paddock. You're there, and I think there's so much about racing that just through the lens of the camera we don't get. Obviously, social media is helping us a lot now, and when we watch Drive to Survive, we go, "Oh my God, that was going on." But of course, that's not real time. The energy in the paddock going into race day, I know all the journalists love to talk, and there's a lot of scuttlebuttle about what's going on and who's running fast. What do you think pre and post, seeing the Lando and Oscar pace and the potential, not the potential, the actual reality of their rivalry, what do you think the talk and the chatter in the paddock is about that and how they performed?
Well, it is going to be interesting. I mean, Oscar's gotten better every season. I think it's only his third in the series compared to Lando, who, though still quite young, is the seasoned long tooth veteran at McLaren. But if Oscar keeps improving at the rate that he has so far in his F1 career, McLaren's going to have a really tough situation on their hands. And I think it's going to come sooner rather than later. I think right now, certainly Lando is still a more complete driver. I think in wheel-to-wheel racecraft, we've seen some incredible examples of what Oscar's capable of. So as he finds that extra bit of pace in qualifying, less than a tenth off Lando, last weekend, he's getting there. The race pace management, we've seen a little bit of that. I think in that first stint, he was quicker. He was told to hold station behind Lando, even though he felt like he had some pace on him. This is going to be an interesting situation as it develops along the season. But I think, going into it, you saw what you always see in F1. Everyone tries to downplay their own chances and call out who they think is so far above everyone else. I think to some of the comments that George Russell was making, Friday, saying, "Oh, well, you might as well give McLaren the Constructors Trophy now." Well, guess what? He said that about Red Bull in Bahrain last year. So you can't listen to some of the scuttlebutt that happens in week one of a 24 race season. There's still a lot of racing to go.
Yeah, I mean, you're sorry, you can't listen. And when we look back at some of our predictions, right, is thinking about who's going to be who's going to be there at the end of the year. I mean, we were actually wrong. No one thought McLaren would be coming through last year like they did, and they were the contenders. Lando's performance, let's dig in. He won the race. He deserved to win the race. I mean, I thought you talk about a complete driver, but I think there has been an element missing, and that was what he brought to the table this year. I talked about it at the beginning of the show. He came into the season with a sort of steely nature that I don't think we've seen before, and then his execution and delivery in front of Max, which is normally the moment you tend to fold, I think was a statement for the rest of the year. I thought it was outrageous the way he drove.
Yeah, I mean, I think you think back to the last, call it 5 races of last year, there was a noticeable change in Lando's swagger, and his confidence. It was no longer the kid that was beating himself up over every small mistake in qualifying. It was now a driver that truly believed he was capable of competing for wins week in and week out, and had that car driver package been around at Bahrain last year, would have very much been in the conversation for the championship. So I think he came into this year very well prepared to take the fight to not just Max and Red Bull, to anybody that can do it. And after preseason testing, now the expectation was fully on him, right? Last year, when you're the chasing driver, it's different. It's a different kind of pressure. When you come in with that expectation now as the reigning constructors champions, as the clear favorites, after testing, that's a different kind of pressure that Lando hasn't really had yet. And the way he handled it was absolutely sublime. The pace in qualifying across the whole team, but being able to get ahead of Oscar was huge. And then come race day, I mean, you know what it's like when it's wet for the first time on the track at the start of the race, and you're the first driver to arrive to the scene of every corner. You're the one that's setting the pace. You're the one that's exploring the grip before anybody else. You're the yardstick by which the other 19 drivers are measuring themselves on that first brake zone into turn 1. That is such an easy situation to make a mistake in. And he did not do that. He had pressure from Oscar early, took care of that, made a small mistake, good call to come into the pits immediately after he drove off, maybe thought he was going to lose the lead. You saw some of that conversation back and forth with him and Will Joseph over the radio. I mean, he was so calm.
Yeah.
He was really methodical about what he was asking and what he wanted to get his opinion across without kind of yelling and screaming about it. And then at the end there, dry tires on a racetrack where the line is maybe 3 inches wider than a Formula One car, with Max absolutely breathing down your neck with DRS for the last few laps. You have to be inch perfect. And he absolutely was. I think it was one of the best races of his career.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so with you on that first lap. When they're driving, you're watching that camera angle out the back, which I thought was great, right? You're saying, "Woo!" as he's on the power, and that feeling, you've got clear air and you don't have the spray in front of you, but you are the pace setter, and I think that's when I really admire, respect as well, the path that they've all taken to get to Formula One. Thousands of kart races in the wet, right? And no sim is going to prepare you for what they have to endure on those opening laps. And I thought it was just great. And there's no way on a sim, mate, you can feel 1,000 horsepower kicking sideways on you.
And then the pressure on top of it all, to just not make a mistake. So I'm with you. I thought it was sublime. Yeah,
really fun. I mean, that's what was making me. I was sitting on my sofa with my girlfriend. We're watching it. I'm going, oh my god, this is gonna. Where is it gonna head? And Max. Let's talk about him. The Max factor, if you like, is how good is their car and how much was him to put the car up there in that place. And you can't really use Liam Lawson as the other side of the measuring stick on the Red Bull performance. But Max didn't have much more in hand, did he? I think there were no reserves for him. He was on the edge.
No, he was 10 tenths, but I mean, I do think he was quicker at the end of that race. And you know what it's like when the dry line is formed, it's almost impossible to pull off a pass. His best hope was to force Lando into a mistake, which obviously Lando didn't do. So Max did absolutely everything. I think when everybody saw the forecast for Sunday and with Max starting third, it was like, I know these McLarens are great, but Max is probably going to win this race.
Yeah.
And he got ahead of Oscar at the start, and it was sort of looking like it was going that way. But then he made that mistake, which is pretty rare for Max. Oscar got back by, and the McLaren pace from there out was really far more than Max could handle because they just don't have the car. It's just for 4 years now, I don't think we've ever truly known how good the Red Bull was because no one has been able to match what Max is doing with it. I mean, for sure, this is not a fair crack for Liam. Weekend one, lots of things, didn't go his way. Fine. But even Max was surprised they were on the inside of row 2 in qualifying. And I think that's fair. I think that car is probably not the second quickest car at the moment, but Max is still just on that level that is so hard to explain and so hard clearly for people to match. You look at Alex Albon, who had an incredible weekend in the Williams, P4 in the I think he ended up back down in P5, Antonelli's penalty getting rescinded. But, having the handle on Carlos, I know it's his first year with the team, but Albon's been very highly rated. You look at what Gasly's done, very highly rated. Everybody that's been put alongside him has been destroyed by him. These drivers have gone on to very successful careers in other teams, but Max is still just so far above everybody else. It is really hard to gauge where that Red Bull really stands.
Yeah, did you see that meme that went out? It was like all these drivers who have raced as his teammate in the clouds, like in heaven, going, Liam, welcome to the club.
Join us.
Join us. It's like the graveyard for talent.
It is. I mean, it's a career-ending seat, and it's the one everybody wants.
Yeah,
it's such an interesting sort of juxtaposition between, hey, is this really good for my career or not? Every driver is going to take it if you get the opportunity. But then I look at the weekend that Yuki had, and if I'm Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, am I thinking, hey, maybe before we get to the August break, there's going to be another swap within the Red Bull camp?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on a lot of drivers, aren't they? But quickly sticking with Liam, we can't write him off, right? I mean, that was an anomaly of a weekend. I mean, when you have Fernando Alonso spinning just as easily, and I do want to ask you, obviously, near on 1,000 horsepower, we saw Carlos have that weird, poof, and he calls it a torque surge. You and I have experienced that when something, I mean, literally, if there's any weird, unexpected, shift in the dynamics of the car through the rear diff and everything, you can spin a car even under the pace car. But we saw it happen throughout the race. I think that shows us how difficult it is, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it isn't a coincidence that 4 of the 6 rookies ended up in the wall.
No.
And I don't think any of them should be held, to the results that they had this weekend that had that issue. Because like you say, Carlos did it an off throttle upshift is not what a Formula One car is designed to do. So when you do it, there's that little bit of extra torque that comes with it. And the conditions were such that anything above what the driver was requesting was too much. And you had these issues. You mentioned Fernando, and it was, Max went off the track. Oscar went off the track. Lando went off the track. These guys were lucky enough to not hit anything, but almost everybody had some sort of mistake, which is pretty rare. And then you kind of look at the other side of it. If we're going to talk about the rookies that did make the mistakes, you have to also give an unbelievable amount of credit to Kimi Antonelli and what he was able to pull off in a very similar situation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my driver of the race was him. Kimi, I mean, I'd love to have seen the driver's briefing beforehand. Toto would have been, you're starting back in, I think, where was he? Started 16th. You're starting back there. We know you're brilliant. You have our support. Just don't go off. And he did more than that.
Finish the laps.
Just do the laps. But he just stealthily came up through the field. Some great overtakes, because every overtake in those conditions is great and purposeful.
Yeah.
And there he is, 4th, then 5th, and 4th. But for me, I mean, he should be wildly happy. And in contrast to the Red Bull camp, I think Toto and the Mercedes board are probably going, we did back the right horse here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's early days. As much as you can't hold a Liam or a Doohan or a Hadjar to the results, the mistakes in Melbourne. I think you can't, necessarily label Kimi the next coming because of one strong result. It was an incredible race, though. I mean, because of all the reasons we've already discussed, why it was impressive that Lando did what he did and Oscar did what he did and Max did what he did. you're talking about a kid, a rookie coming in, his very first Grand Prix, an immense amount of pressure on him. I know we talk about how all these drivers have pressure, but I think it's safe to say coming into this season, the biggest story was Lewis to Ferrari by a wide margin. But the second biggest was Kimi replacing Lewis at Mercedes. And we all know what happened at Monza last year. So he comes in with the last time he drove one of these things in front of everybody, had that little bit of a black mark on his record. The pressure of the first race, all those things, the conditions, you throw it all in together for him to conduct himself and handle the situation the way he did was it's a very positive sign for the future.
Yeah, I think he listened to their instructions. I'm sure he was probably more capable of a flamboyant race, but that wasn't his job this weekend, and it worked out. So I think, do you remember many team owners have said this, haven't they? They'd rather have a fast driver, a supernaturally fast driver to calm him down than trying to make another driver super fast. So I think we're seeing something there. But let's talk about George Russell, because, I mean, obviously ended up on the podium. Is he just a sneaky, stealthy, calculating? I mean, he's a brilliant talent, but you know what I'm saying? He's like the guy at the end of the bar that always gets the girl at the end of the night when you get drunk. You know, I mean, that's him, right? He pulls it off.
That's a great analogy. That is beautiful. I absolutely love that analogy. But you're right. I mean, you think back to Austria last year. I mean, you even think back to Spa. I mean, those are results that they weren't expecting, but he just pulls them off. He's in the right place at the right time, doesn't make mistakes. You know, he's very rare with unforced errors. And again, I don't think we know exactly what the true pecking order was. I think he maybe, outkicked his coverage a bit in qualifying to be up there in the second row. Obviously benefited from Oscar having his off to make it up on the podium, but that's the name of the game, right? Yeah. He didn't make the mistake that a driver in front of him did. So a great reward. And it's days like that, right? I think back to last season, how Ferrari managed to keep themselves in that championship fight all the way up to Abu Dhabi. It was because on days when they didn't have the best car, they still brought home a fifth and a sixth or a fourth and a seventh, you know? And I don't think Mercedes has the best car, but I think George getting a podium on a day like that is the kind of thing that team really needs to capitalize on, in those situations.
Yeah, I think they're going to win races this year. They're going to be a title contender in one way or another if they keep doing this. And they have two drivers to line up cracking in the points. And I think that's a dynamic that's why Liam will be faster with Red Bull. He's certainly going to probably be up there a lot more than Sergio Perez was last couple of years. But there's no way in today's Formula One that if you need two equally good drivers per se in each of the cars to be able to use the strategy to win races. I don't think you can be a one-horse team anymore, and I think that's what Max is used to. So I think managing that dynamic is going to be really interesting for us.
It is going to be interesting. I mean, again, Liam statistically, it's working against him, right? Mm-hmm. He's still got a lot to prove to get to Max's level to even have that discussion. But I think that's why, looking at it right now, it's really hard to bet against McLaren for the Constructors' Championship because you look across their driver lineup, the continuity, the speed of the car, that's a tough one. Red Bull can be fast with Max. Can it be fast with Liam? Maybe. We don't know yet. You've got a rookie at Mercedes, so even if they nail the car, there's going to be rookie mistakes that sneak in, inexperience that's going to cost him. Lewis is still learning the car, and the car doesn't seem to be as quick as we thought it was. So I mean, they are just so well poised right now. And you're right, especially in the constructor side, you can't do it with one. We've seen Red Bull win drivers' championships with one guy at the front, but you cannot be a constructors champion if you're not having both drivers regularly up there.
Yep. Ferrari. I don't know about you, but I was excited every time watching Lewis go out. Those first, literally, I made sure I was sitting there to watch his first laps in the first practice. Something about seeing that yellow helmet in that red car. I don't think while they're going home on Sunday thinking it wasn't as good as we'd hoped. In a way, from Lewis's point of view, I don't think it's as bad as it could have been, especially considering the running. Especially considering the transition to a new car and what he had to learn. What were your takeaways for Ferrari's performance?
Well, I think Ferrari's performance came up a little short from expectations overall. there's even, you could look at the race and look, a race like that, I really try hard to not look back on strategy decisions and try to play, Monday morning quarterback, because when you don't know what the weather's doing, this is not a straightforward call in any way, but was there a potential to maybe do something different? Fine. But let's not look at that. I look at the fact that, Lewis was able to get as close as he was to Charlotte qualifying, which was terrific. We heard him talk about how he doesn't even know what switches to flip to drive this car in the wet.
K1, so, what's K1?
Ask. yeah, exactly. A huge ask for him to go straight into a rain race. We heard the back and forth with his engineer. That's one of the biggest things, the biggest takeaways for me is he is having to relearn, it's a first date, right? It's a first date that is going to have some rocky moments. They need to learn each other's love language. They need to learn, what makes each other tick. And I think Lewis handled it really well. His responses on the radio were very direct and what's the word I'm looking for? They were direct without being harsh.
I think the British word is that they were curt, right? They were short and to the point with a little edge.
With a little edge, but an appropriate amount of edge, because you don't have time when you're navigating a Grand Prix car around a wet racetrack to have a nice back and forth, a lot of give and take. And a lot of other drivers may have gotten a lot more angry and said different things over the radio. So I thought he handled it really well. And at the end of the day, man, it's impossible to overstate how tough that weekend must have been for Lewis with the attention and the pressure that he was under.
Yeah.
He is a 7-time world champion. He is not new to pressure by any stretch. And I bet you if you asked him, that was probably the highest pressure Grand Prix that he's ever experienced because of the attention, because of the buildup, the anticipation of him making that move. It's got to rattle anybody, even the greatest are going to think back on how stressful that weekend really was. He survived it, performed well, and I think that they'll only just grow and get better from here.
Yeah, a great assessment. I mean, I know there's a lot of armchair warriors like most of us are now, analyzing his performance and slamming him a bit, and also saying, how did they not cover the eventuality of that on the radio, or this on the radio? I was just saying to Jeremiah, my producer, before the show, that doesn't matter how much sim you've got, an AI and 7 world championships, you can't cover every eventuality in your preseason, right? Well, if this happens and you say that and that's going on. So no wonder there were some variables on the radio transmission. And after 12 years with Bono, his engineer, they probably didn't need to talk as much. It's, they understood each other. They knew predicting what's happening. So I think getting that's like, I don't know. He's lost a wingman and he's got a new one, and they just don't talk the same language. Literally, they don't talk the same language.
True. That's a great point. But no, you're right. And I think what's important for people to remember is, look, you're 100% correct that you cannot think of every eventuality in the amount of time that they had. It's a day and a half in the real car, which there were lots of things to get through. And even if you spent 20 days in the sim, it's hard to come up with every situation, but also you can practice that situation sitting in a sim, heart rate down, nobody watching, no cost for errors. It's very different when he's back in an actual car at a track that he's raced at many times with a different team and a different car, and 90% of the environment of the race weekend is the same as what he's used to, but the 10% that's different is the thing that he's driving in the most important part. So his brain will have been remembering driving around Albert Park in a Mercedes for the last 12 years. And so even when something happens that you have talked about, that you have practiced, it's not always the first time in real life that you're able to execute the way you should. Yeah. It's so much different under pressure. I imagine like the first time a surgeon is doing, surgery on a living patient rather than a cadaver. It's like, I know the steps. We've gone through how to do it. But when a life's on the line, it's a very different thing. It's a similar sort of situation where in the heat of the moment, the adrenaline, everything, you're going to you're going to need to give them a few passes on those things.
Yeah. Thanks for that insight, because I just think I mean, you're driving currently. It wasn't long ago you were in IndyCar, and you must look at what they have to do in the cockpit of those cars, even with your experience, and go, I don't know how they do it. I mean, that's what I'm just putting words in your mouth, but the complexity and what they're having to shift, I just about did brake bias. You know what I mean? This is blows my mind. And you must look at it as well and go, holy crap, compared to an IndyCar, this is 10x.
I mean, the level of adjustability that the drivers have from inside the cockpit of a Formula One car is absolutely unbelievable. And you listen to the one I actually love listening to the most is Alex Albon, really into the weeds on some of this stuff. And I'm nerdy and I like that side of it. And listening to and not even just the simple stuff like the diff adjustments that they can make on the wheel, your brake bias adjustment corner to corner, brake shape adjustments depending on which part of the track. Then you get into the hybrid maps and when you're deploying and how you're regenning and all these different things. All those things affect the performance of the car, the handling of the car, the tire wear. You have to be able to calculate everything that's happening in real time. And we're talking dozens of different like inputs that you can give or adjust that affects how the car performs on this lap at this corner. And then, times that by 57 laps and 14 corners or whatever it is. Yeah, these guys need minor degrees in computer engineering to really maximize all the systems that a Formula One car has these days.
Yeah, I'm just really glad I drove in an era when you could be a little less intelligent.
The steering wheel just had a radio button and that was it.
Yeah, here I am. Well, when you look back at old Formula One cars, they had a radio button and that was about it. So, pretty cool.
3 gauges, a radio button, and a stick shift.
And that's all we need. Well, obviously, we're running out a bit of time here. Don't have time to really go through the rookie. Doonan, feel sorry for him. Behrman, oh my God, they got to get themselves back together. I thought Lance Stroll did a great job, actually. I mean, I'm the first to line up and bash him, but to stay on track in those conditions, made some good passes. I mean, I thought he did all right. But one of the rookies, James, that had a really rough weekend was obviously Isack Hadjar, and you saw him, on the outlap. I've crashed on the outlap, by the way. I think most people have at some point in their career. The dejection, the way he was just totally cut up, the eyes of the world on him. And then Lewis Hamilton's father, giving him all that support. Didn't go down well with Helmut Marko. I guess he's not a kind, sensitive, warm, fuzzy teddy bear kind of guy. But what's your take on that situation?
I mean, look, I can't imagine how it feels in your first Grand Prix. You spend your whole life to get to that moment, and the moment is taken from you before you even really get a chance to experience it. I get the dejection. I get why he was so upset. It was a beautiful moment with Anthony coming in, I'm sure giving him some great words of wisdom. He's a young driver. I'm sure he's got a long career in front of him. It's tough, as you know, as a driver in the moment, that's all you're thinking about. You're not thinking about down the road yet. But I do think as a driver, it's important to also not think about what's already happened. You can't change what you can't change. And Red Bull is a cutthroat system. If there's a team that's not going to take well to a driver publicly having that level of reaction, I'm not surprised it was them. He's got every right to be as upset as he wants. I think it probably would have behooved him to wait till he got to at least walk with purpose and your head held somewhat high till you got to your driver room, kick, scream, cry, whatever you need to do. But racing drivers, Formula One drivers, have to be so mentally strong, and you have to be able to put bad days behind you. If you looked at his body language, it looked like something that was going to sit with him for a very long time.
Yep.
Luckily, he's in the car again in a few days. China's coming up. He'll get the chance to right that ship. And I really hope for him that the weekend goes well, because what you would hate to see is a bad weekend spiral into another bad weekend, which just sort of keeps, going. Those snowball effects can happen to athletes in any sport when you have a result like that. But talented kid, he got the drive for a reason. And I really hope that he's not being too hard on himself and that he has a strong weekend in China.
China this weekend, super fast track. What are your predictions?
short of expecting another McLaren 1-2 in qualifying, I can really make any. Again, because of what happened in the race, everything's still so up in the air. There's still so much to learn. We have no real good sense of race pace, of tire degradation, of all those things. But it's like you say, it's a fast track. It's a raceable track. So I do think McLaren's going to be up front, but I think it's going to be a great race from there on out.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, I know you follow Formula One because you're going to be in the pit lane. And when will that be? When's the next race?
First race for me is Japan in a few weeks.
Okay.
Then I'll hit Hungary in midsummer, and then kind of post IndyCar starting Baku, I'll finish the season out.
Yeah, because IndyCar is going to be pretty wild this year as well, isn't it? So a lot to look forward to.
Very much so.
Great. Well, James, thank you so much. And you come to Vegas, don't you? You're at the Vegas race.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll get you in here in the studio in person. That'll be fun.
Would love to.
Thanks so much, mate. And we'll see you soon. Take care, bud. Always a great time talking with James Hinchcliffe. I mean, imagine what he's juggling right now. IndyCar. I mean, he's one of the lead guys there, and it's turning out to be an incredible season already. Will Buxton's right there in the throw of that action. We miss him in Formula One, of course, and I hope we're going to get him on the show at some point because it'd be interesting to get his take, having changed camps over to IndyCar. But, of course, also James turning up at those Formula One races. Maybe he can call in from one of them and give us an update. So it is China coming up this weekend, one of the fastest racetracks of the season and a very different type of race. But I think we're going to see some unpacking of the storylines that have just kicked off last weekend in Melbourne. And we briefly touched on it in our chat just now, but the dynamics of winning for McLaren. Inter-team rivalries are so engaging. They're captivating. It's actually what we need in sport. Without them, it gets a little dull. It's great for ratings and it's great for the fans, but is an absolute shit show for the team management. I'm not sure I can say that, but it really is. It's the ultimate situation to have two drivers equally talented, equally hungry, in equal equipment, heading their own paths to get to the championship. It allows for better strategy moves. It allows for them to use much more complex versions of the race play that they want to see unfold. But you also have two different personalities who have to be managed. And I think that is incredibly difficult for Zach Brown and Andrea Stella. I mean, think back to Prost versus Senna. They couldn't help but hit each other when you have two people who are arguably as dominant behind the wheel. So Oscar, for me, is an Iceman rocket ship. We heard him on the radio. He is going to deliver his message every time. He is ruthless in execution out there on the track, lacking a little bit of race knowledge and experience behind the wheel of a Formula One car. But he's like a sponge and is absorbing it every single moment. And Mark Webber, as his manager, couldn't be more similar as a personality. Lando, he's kind of just found his man parts, hasn't he? And he knows how to use them. He's hungry to win, just like Oscar. But I think he feels he should be the one leading McLaren through this potentially dominant year, to head towards the Drivers' Championship as well as a manufacturer. So I think that what Zach and Andrea Stella are going to have to deal with is there will be on-track clashes. There will be strategy calls that do not benefit the other. And it's going to be an absolute chaos, not just on track, but when they get back to the pit box. It's very hard to stop that spilling over into the race, as you could see already. And I don't know, what did you think? Making a call, telling Oscar to hold position while they work their way through traffic in those tricky conditions. I understand it. You don't want them to hit each other or force each other off when a win is on the table. But these are the best drivers in the world. These are mature drivers in respective ways that should be able to handle that. So why did they need to push that across the radio? It just sets a tone that I think is potentially dangerous, because Oscar is not going to obey that for very long, especially at the beginning. And you know how it goes. We see it, whether it's Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes. By the time you get to a certain point in the season, he who is naturally dominant, he who is performing best, getting the most points, there's sort of an energy shift to your side of the garage. You get preference on coming in the pit lane first. You get preference on nearly everything because they have to maximize every single point. I don't think Oscar's going to want to play that game. He just re-signed for that $25 million a year. He knows he's got equal rights out there on the track, and I think Zach and Andrea are going to have every bit of their stewardship in demand, and it's going to be fun for us to watch, but it's going to be an absolute crazy one for them. Looking forward to this weekend. I think we're going to have the rookies redeeming themselves. I think that's one of my storylines. I think Liam Lawson has the full backing of Red Bull, and I think his camp will have taken him under their wing. They will have said, listen, we know what you need to do. Let's not get freaked out by one bad weekend. I know you wanted more, but look what you achieved last year. We know how good you are. That's why you're in the seat ahead of Yuki, and I think you're going to see him have a much better weekend. I don't think it'll be top 5 would be good, but I don't think Max will even make it too far out the top 5. So just get close to Max, and I think you've done a great job. Yuki Tsunoda is someone we haven't really talked about yet. I mean, he had 6th place, and it was just a showmanship. I thought he drives so well, and that he's looking across in the paddock and looking at Helmut Marko and Christian Horner saying, that should have been me. I should have been in that car, and look what I did in the second tier team. So if he can do it again, if he can put himself up there, conditions played a part. I know that, and attrition, but if he can keep it in the top 10, he's starting to make some very bold statements. Predictions for this weekend in China. I'm actually going to stick with my 66.6% correct predictions. Well, actually, no, 33% predictions from last weekend, in that I think Lando will come out on top. I think he will get pole. I think Oscar will be right behind him. If it's dry, and it's looking that way, and if the speed of the track, much more overtaking opportunities, I think we're going to see McLaren extending their capabilities of their car. And there's knowing how Formula One ebbs and flows, every point will count, so they're going to push like heck. And I think that they will be 1-2 again at the front of the field. I'm not a good gambling man, so no wonder I'm absolute crap at this, but I think Charles Leclerc will be right up there. He may even go for pole. I think he has the potential. Ferrari will regroup fast, and I think he'll be 3rd. Behind those two, the way the race will unfold. So that's what I think. Let me know on social media what you think. Again, don't bet money according to my predictions, because I'm actually not very good at it. Other things I think that we're going to see come into play this weekend is obviously the slippery, smooth operator that is George Russell. He is going to be right up there, and I think Mercedes have more performance in that car to come. But I will be watching like a proud uncle at how Kimi Antonelli does. I think you're going to see his confidence. It was pretty good going in, but now as they get right up to, after Melbourne's result, finishing 4th, George in 3rd, I think they might release his reins a bit. He did the sensible job this weekend spectacularly. I think coming into China, he's going to be able to show a bit more flamboyance, pacing, qualifying, and all that. So remember, laps behind the wheel is what they all need, and I think that's fantastic. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show. Next week, I actually do have Zach Brown joining us, and if they win again this weekend, what a great conversation that's going to be. Also, let's get into him about how he's handling the drivers. Thank you to James Hinchcliffe for joining us, and thank you for watching along. Of course, you're now watching us on the Sirius XM ESPN Extra Channel 81 and on their on-demand app. Of course, also wherever else you get your podcasts, and on YouTube if you prefer to watch us that way. Thank you to The Wynn for allowing me to be in their beautiful studio once again, and to Mobile One for the love of driving. I'll see you next week.